This is the Level Up Engineering Podcast, where we talk with some of the most successful engineering leaders who reveal actionable management insights that help you take your developer team to the next level. This episode is brought to you by Coding Sans, a software development agency building web applications from design to delivery with React, Node.js, and Angular. Check them out at codingsans.com.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Level Up Engineering Podcast. I am your host, Carolina Toth. As always, I am here with another accomplished technology leader. This time, it's Rod Garcia, VP of Engineering for Platform at Slack. And before we get into today's topic, let me just have Rod introduce himself. He's been at Slack for over 3 years, and he's had quite a few experiences before that. So, Rod, welcome to the show. Please tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you, Carolina. Yeah, as you said, I'm Rod Garcia. I'm VP of Engineering at Slack. I'm based in the East Coast of the United States and outside of New York City in an area called Long Island. It's a cold morning today. It's 32 degrees. It's close to 0 degrees Celsius. But I managed to stay warm here in my home office.
Awesome. Would you mind to tell us a bit about what your passions are and what you do for a living?
Yeah. So one of my passions is really helping teams to do their passion, building up, the best products, and doing that in a way that helps the teams to become a community. And in this world where we are all moving to a remote first mindset. And this has been a big transition. And so I'm very passionate to find ways how teams can navigate this transition and actually helping everybody in the teams to do their best job from where they want to do it. That's right now one of my passions. Outside of work, one of my hobbies, I have two big hobbies. I love doing pizza. I'm super passionate into pizza though. I've been trying for a year to figure out different recipes. Haven't succeeded yet. And prior to that, I tried to do really well with barbecue. My family and my neighbors says that actually I done well, but it's still, I think it's to be defined. I'm still trying.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much. So to get into today's topic, we are going to talk about helping businesses create and manage human processes and processes with human, infusing efficiency into human tasks. We all know that sometimes we are trying to create efficient processes, and sometimes that makes us less engaged. And sometimes we are not as passionate about what we do because we need to do some unnecessary steps for the sake of processes. So today we will talk about how to make processes more engaging. Before we jump into the nitty-gritty, please tell us what your definition of process management is so that we can be on the same page with our listeners.
Yeah, thank you. There are different approach to process management. The one that resonates the more with my leadership style is that I like to describe process management itself as the number of activities that we need to perform as leaders in order to help the team to do their best job, their best work, without having a lot of waste in the process, as rework. Also, how we call it in the lean world. So, as leaders, constantly we need to listen. We need to work with the team to understand how their everyday operations, everyday tactics are going. So, I like to describe that process management like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. If we can talk a little more about how processes are made. I imagine that you start processes with the business goals in mind, and then you kind of elaborate how business goals can be achieved. How does engagement come into play when it comes to business goals?
That's a great question. I think what's at play, fundamentally, I think we all need to understand the why, right? Mm-hmm. If all teammates, understand the why. What's the goal? What's the mission? What's the ultimate goal of the organization? If we all understand that, then processes in general needs to aim to that goal, right? I like to sometimes I think, especially for me as a leader, sometimes I think about these, and sometimes I fall into the temptation of saying, oh, we could introduce a new process here or a new process there. But the question for me is that, to the point Carolina, is like, how this helps the business? How this helps to achieve the objectives of the team? And if normally I don't have the answer to that question, that's a sign for me probably should take a step back, and reflect what I'm seeing that maybe I want to introduce this process. So I know I'm getting ahead myself a little bit, but I think that's a good example on my mind that how the why, how the business objective influence the process conversation. But fundamentally, any action, process, or tactics, or operations, to your point, Carolina, I think, it needs to be aimed with the objective of the business. Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if we talk about Slack in particular, what's Slack's approach to automation?
Actually, I love that question because personally, for me, as somebody that I'm huge into, automate my everyday life. For example, my lights here in the office, I press a button, the lights turns on, change the colors, they have different workflows in my workstation. I try to automate as much as possible. But when I take a step back about automation, I like to focus instead in the solution, right? Because for different people, in my opinion, the work automation might not be so familiar, right? And so I like to focus instead in thinking about the solutions, right? I say, okay, I do these repetitive steps. For example, using the example of my office, I come every morning to the office, I need to turn the lights on, unlock my laptop, log into the different software I use to do my job, and repeat this number of steps every day. Wouldn't it be awesome that I just press a button and all those things are ready to go? So I really focus on that. And how this connect with your question about Slack, our mission at Slack is making, work life simpler, more pleasant, and more productive. And it's exactly that, right? And the how we're focusing automation or how we're empowering workers to make their work simpler, more pleasant, and more productive is actually by providing tools to them to leverage the different features we have in Slack and taking advantage that, now with the digital HQ, where we're all remote, all the work is happening on Slack. So really, Slack is becoming this engagement layer, right? Where when we have all the content, the collaboration on the teammates, we can provide features so they can build their own solutions to these repetitive steps.
I love that. Slack is an engagement layer. It is interesting to think about the communication platform that in that manner. And with that said, please elaborate a little more on what you try to automate. You mentioned that you help companies, build up their own kinds of engagement tools, but how should we think about your approach at Slack? What are the things that you automate and why?
Yeah, a good example. I think it's super, perhaps it's simple, but perhaps shows the power of this engagement layer, and the way we're approaching it. Since we're all in the digital HQ now, I work, for example, in the case of Slack, Slack is our HQ. When I log into Slack, I'm literally in the HQ of the business, right? So all my teammates, cross-functional partners, everybody that I collaborate with every day is in this digital HQ. So, for example, every day I try to log off early, around not late than 6 p.m., to take care of my family, to play with my son, to be with my wife, to prepare dinner, and so I can focus on them. That for me is very important, right? I want to have that time to focus on my family and to stay away from work. But how do I tell my teammates that can work across different time zones, right? That actually I'm focusing time on my family. And so actually, I build a workflow that when I'm stepping out from work, sets my status to say, hey, focusing on my family, and actually turn off notifications. Right? And that's a workflow we build, and we have a feature called Workflow Builder that allows you to create all different integrations. And then when I'm stepping out for work, I execute the workflow and I set my status, I turn off notifications, so everybody can say when they're going to send me a message, say, oh, okay, Rod is with his family, right? So that's an example of the engagement layer, because allows folks, since now we are on this remote first culture, which is great, provides so much flexibility, but also how we give the signal, right? How we give the signal to say, hey, I might not be available for you right now.
Right. I actually just thought of this this integration that we use at Coding Sense for being in a meeting. It says, when you integrate Slack to your calendar, it will say, this person is a meeting, which automatically signals that you might not be able to get a hold of this person just right now, even though they might be online.
Exactly.
How did you get started with this approach to automation or to this integrated mindset of using Slack in a way?
I think in this world where we're all distributed, and it's great because after the pandemic, I think we all I think there's a large tendency in the industry around teammates really wanted to have the flexibility to work from where they want, but also wanting to have that human contact. Right, because when we're in the office, hey, we'll say, hey, let's go for a walk together, or let's share a coffee, or just ask that question, how are you doing? And so to answer your question, like how we approach and how we started to think like this is that, for me, a simple question reflecting in these cases is how we will solve if we're co-located in the office. Right, using the example about the calendar, right, if we were in the office, probably the teammate might not be in the desk, will be in the meeting, right? Because we can see them. We can see the desk, right? And in a virtual environment, that's more difficult because we don't have those interaction points. So I think what's important here is that how we give the signals, how we help folks to discover when somebody might be available or somebody might not. And that has carried out to our journey.
Right. So in a way, it's the mindset of building those non-obvious signals that we are used to into the platform, so that we can see in a way that that somebody is, for example, not at their desk.
That's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, and I was going to say too, Karina, there's another side of these, which is interesting for me too, is that enterprises, for example, as operations and the execution of the business perhaps becomes more complex. We have to react to different dynamics right now in the world. So companies are relying more and more with different systems that get more specialized, right? I'm imagining, for example, in the case of a financial institution, right? There might be a system that controls credit, another system that controls risk or fraud. All those systems help the business a lot, but also it becomes more fragmented, perhaps, right? So another point of view of the engagement layer, right, since we're approaching Slack as this digital SKU, is that how we help teammates, for example, let's say if there's an event in a credit card, how we help people, in this case, somebody answering a call from a consultant, to just react to the case right away from Slack without having to perhaps log into multiple systems, right? So how we enable that engagement and just to solve, again, the solution, to execute that solution without having a teammate to have to log into different systems, instead engage with Slack to solve that.
So you're kind of trying to make everything come together in a way, and make it easier for the end user to not have to leave the platform of Slack, but to have everything at hand. Is that correct?
I would say perhaps since the work is happening on Slack, right? We're collaborating with your peers, with your team members, and the context is there in the channel of the team or in the channel of the project. We really want to bring these signals, right? Can be either, is a teammate available to have a conversation, or perhaps we're going to use this system to solve this question, or hey, let's jump in to collaborate this document together. How we enable that so all the context is still present, and we need to switch context back and forth, but instead we leverage the power of the digital SKU, where you can collaborate with your team through huddles, for example, and you can jump into a call right there. Or since you have the conversation of the history of the case, perhaps can we put a workflow there perhaps to resolve the case, right? So all the context is encapsulated there. So with our objective is just to make things simpler and folks to have, a more productive life.
Most definitely. So if you are working on creating processes for your people, perhaps some of our listeners are in the midst of creating new processes. Do you have kind of a system to recognize whether or not your processes and tools serve the business goals that we have talked about previously? Or what is your kind of recognition system for making sure that those processes are in line with what you have planned for?
Yeah, I normally rely on three areas to recognize that. First, listening. I always say that one of my favorite part of my job is one-on-one sessions, and I really mean that, because in that space, I'm naturally curious, and I like to listen to questions. I like to see the challenges and opportunities through the eyes of the teammates I work with every day. So to listen in that, I start listening patterns perhaps. I say, okay, the pull request review process might be challenging. Okay, it's taking us a long time to approve this pull request. Or and the way we're reviewing technical specs, we're not getting the feedback we need in time. And you start listening to things, right? So that would be the first area, how to discover opportunities for processes. The second area for me is identify what are the metrics that the team, we can all understand, to say how we're measuring together, right? How we understand success, and identifying some metrics that helps everybody to say, okay, these metrics will help us to understand how we're doing, right? And different teams, each team is a universe by itself, so different metrics can help the teams to measure their progress. But it's important as a leader to identify those so that we can get early signs if the systems we have in place are working or perhaps need a little bit more attention. And the third one is perhaps the more complex, because it's the combination of multiple activities, is that if we deliver the value, right, we say we will deliver, right? And in order to get there are multiple things that need to happen, right, to be there. And as the team makes progress and we get closer to the goal, really reflecting how close we are to achieve it. And if for some reason things are off track, again, falling back to the first point, which is, hey, becoming naturally curious to understand why. So normally those are the two things I rely to identify, improvements or areas of opportunities for process, and then work with the team, right, to say, okay, do we agree with this? Do we see the same things, right? There's a great book I read years ago, and I see, by the way, I check it out every year, once a year. It has become my go-to book. It's about lean in software engineering. And Lean has this approach to us multiple times why. Because normally systems, especially, is multiple layers. So really to understand the improvement opportunities is really important to peel off these layers to detect what's an opportunity.
I love that. Thank you. We will definitely share the book in the show notes. So let's steer our boat in a little different direction. You have quite the experience in software engineering and in leading engineering teams. What are some of the common mistakes that you have seen in process management and that you would warn our listeners about?
That's a great question, because actually I was reflecting about this yesterday when I was preparing for our conversation today, and perhaps one of the most important areas that I constantly see myself, but also when I support leaders, is the temptation to optimize earlier process. It's kind of similar in software engineering, right? When we say early optimization, it's always challenging because there's no all context to say if the optimization is good. I think the same applies to processes, right? I think there's sometimes as leader there's a temptation that we always need to balance confusing behavior with process. Right? When we say, okay, perhaps a behavior is not helping the team to achieve their goal, instead of working the behavior, we put a process as a proxy to solve that. And many times I've seen that the outcome are not great because process not necessarily help to improve the behavior of the human behavior. Right. So I think that's one of the most repetitive patterns of challenges I've seen in process on teams is trying to address behavior by using processes instead of having that coaching conversation, instead of having that conversation with the teammate or with the team to reflect on that behavior and agree perhaps and see how we can make it better.
Right. Most definitely. I just had this conversation with our CTO where I've been saying this for a few years, sometimes it's not the tool's problem, it's a human problem. And without, as you said, addressing the human problem, there is not really a point in implementing a new tool or in using a new process, because that's not going to fix the internal struggles or problems of the team or maybe the internal conflicts that they might have that they need to solve first and then go on to the process.
100%. I think, on my mind, process help us to collaborate much easier, right? But the behavior, the collaboration, the trust is the one that power the process, right? Otherwise, without that, I think what's going to happen is that I've seen this happening. The teams enter in this snowball effect that the behaviors, the challenges in the behavior continues, the process is in place, and these two things feed each other, right? And the process is not helping the team get more frustrated, and it becomes this slippery slope process, right? So that's what, and then we say, oh, let's put another process, let's put another change in the process, and becomes this layer of layer, where actually maybe you just need a conversation with the team or with the teammate, and the team is continue working much simpler with less processes by achieving the goals.
Right. So it comes down to human engagement and making sure that you are aware of what the true problems of your teams are. You already have given us a couple suggestions as to what we can do in these situations, but if you could share a story of creating more efficient processes or a more engaging processes in one of your workplaces or from your previous experiences, I think that would be great to maybe try to single out a single event on which we can ponder.
Yeah. I can share a story. Some years ago, I was supporting a team that was responsible for a set of core services for the business. This is before Slack and a previous job experience. And when I joined the organization, what I saw was the team was in this constant interruptions mode, right? Multiple questions will come. The team was trying to execute the roadmap, right? But interruptions kept coming. Like different teams will ask for questions. The whole team will focus on answering those questions, and there was this constant, sense of interruptions. So as I onboarded to the team, again, following these points I was mentioning earlier, and one-on-ones, listening to the team, how each one of them perceived this, I started discovering some things. Some things were happening, right? The first thing was the team didn't have the space to, what I like to describe, productize their systems, their APIs, so that, for example, documentation wasn't great. So the team, instead of sending folks perhaps documentation, will rely on answering questions, right? So that was the first thing I saw. The second thing I saw was there was this, perhaps the code itself and the way it was architected needed a little bit more, again, documentation, but in the code to help others to understand how this will work. And then there was this sense of urgency, right, for the business, because this was this set of core services that without that other teams couldn't build at the top of. Mm-hmm. So there was multiple teams will come to say, hey, oh my God, we need to ship this in 2 or 3 weeks more. Can you help us to unlock this? And the team will say, of course, we want to be good teammates. We're going to help you. So I saw these 3 themes around the challenge. So as a process opportunity, I proposed this to the team and explained why it was important. I'm a huge fan of, there's a book called The Goal that talks about the theory of constraints. And I'm a huge fan of that. What the theory of constraints, what it means in practice is every organization has constraints that, and as the word constraint says, limit our impact, limit the amount of value we can deliver to the organization. And in that context, the constraint was the time of the teammates. We had, of course, limited number of teammates. And of course, we can always hire more, but that wouldn't solve the issue. The number of questions, interruptions will continue. So the constraint was that, hey, we have just limited number of hours a day. Mm-hmm. What can we do? And so, what I propose to the team is let's put a system in place. Let's put a process in place. First, let's put a sandbox to the cost. The cost of the interruptions. Right now, the cost is paid by the entire team. Mm-hmm. Let's sandbox the cost to a certain number of hours a week. Right, and the way we decided to do this was, okay, we will define a rotation of 1 teammate a week, just to be available to answer these questions. Mm-hmm. So we sandbox the cost. So now instead of everybody answering questions, now I sandbox the cost to 1 teammate, and that's a rotation. We understand that. The second point of the strategy was to amplify the constraint. We need to amplify the constraint in terms of what gives the number of hours. In other words, what gives the information. It's information to others to be empowered to do the implementations and the roadmap. So it's okay, what they need for that is information, they need context. So great, let's start building the documentation, right, that will empower others then to use all this set of core APIs to build those services. And then the third step, we say, okay, now let's connect 1 and 2. When folks come to ask questions, let's dog food all this documentation and send to them, say, hey, tell us if the answer is here. If not here, tell us where you're missing it so we can add it. Mm-hmm. And we start investing like that. And actually, after a quarter, we start getting less questions. Mm-hmm. And the team, we have more space, and we keep going down this path to keep amplifying documentation, engaging with others to say, okay, use our documentation, tell us what's missing, and repeat. Obviously, at the start, it was challenging because the partner teams were not used to this, right? That they were used to get the quick answer, right? But this is where in process the why becomes so important, right? And that storytelling. And we will say, okay, and part of my job too was to engage with other leaders and organizations to explain, say, we need your help. We need your buy-in. If we don't do this, we won't be able to scale, right? So help us in this process. And the team was great, and we were able to do this. And after the first quarter and then the following quarters, this constraint was amplified, in terms of information, and the teams were more along.
If you allow me, I think that story really gives off a couple great takeaways. First of all, that the process doesn't need to be future proof in the sense that it always has to be the process that we go to. It can be just a process to kind of help the team out of a ditch in a sense. And then maybe a process is best when it, on the long run, makes itself not useful, so that if your team doesn't get any more questions, there is no need for a process of making these questions answered. And it also made me think a lot about change management. You said you had to engage with the leaders who were on your level, who had the teams asking questions of your team. Everything in process management just seems to point back to the human interactions that you mentioned previously, and that you talked about clearly communicating the goals behind the processes and behind the changes that the new process might entail. With all of that said, some of the key takeaways from me are how new processes are useful only if you have first looked at the team who is going to operate those processes. You mentioned one-on-ones, and you mentioned making sure that the metrics are good for everyone, and you mentioned kind of looking at the before picture and making sure that people are open to the new processes rather than having a people problem and not being able to fix whatever is at hand by new processes. You also mentioned making sure to check back and seeing whether or not the process delivers together with the people who are operating it, which I think is a really great point. A lot of us forget, and maybe I should only talk about myself, but a lot of us forget, we create a new process, we think everything is going well, but we need to check back and make sure that whatever we have implemented actually makes the lives of the people who are using it easier. And you also mentioned one of the red flags is making sure that we resist the temptation to optimize too early. That's a double-edged sword, of course, but it sounds like a lot of process creation is human interaction and making sure that people are on the same page, understand why they are implementing processes, and also how this is going to make their lives easier. Is there anything else whatsoever that you would like to share with the listeners, be it an experience or be it a word of warning, or be it some tips and tricks if they are in the midst of implementing new processes for the people?
Yeah, what I would say is that I think, Carolina, you described it awesome in the sense that first, let's make sure that everybody sees the why and the current state. Everybody agrees and they can see it. Because once, that will allow folks to get the buy-in for the process, right? If the team and the folks that will use this process cannot see what's driving that context, it's going to be really difficult for them to do it and understand the why and give you feedback also. Say, hey, is this working? Is this helping me? So really invest time in that part of change management, right? that helps all of us are part of the organization to understand this is what I see. This is what I think we should do the process, and this is the reason why. And do you folks agree? Like, what do you think? And just engaging in that conversation and then having check-ins to say, how's it going? Is it working? This kind of like continuous improvement culture where, a process is not set once in stone, right? It evolves with time. So that's the responsibility of all leaders to, it's something I hold myself as well accountable, is having those check-ins with the team and say, hey, how's this working? Is this helping? Is there any proposal that we can make it better? And make folks part of that process to improve the process, and make it collaborative with them. Ultimately, teammates using any process in place are the best equipped to tell you, how it can be better. So engaging in that conversation with them, and also to your point earlier, is like, help understand what the business needs, and having these two worlds connecting does the job that any effective leader does.
Right. Thank you so much. I think those are excellent words to kind of set our North Star to. Thank you for this conversation. I think we have established that any kind of process needs to be a lot more human-centered than what we are used to, perhaps. You were director of engineering at Shutterstock, and you worked at Squarespace, and now you're at Slack. Where can our listeners follow your work if they think that this is something that they might be interested in?
Yeah, I will say folks can add me on LinkedIn. They can look for my name. They will find me. And also they can follow all the work we're doing in the platform team at Slack. We're on Twitter. And folks also can follow us on the website. So I would say to go, to slack.com, so they can find all the work, and also follow us on Twitter. The Slack account, but also the platform account on Twitter.
Thank you very much. I will also add that, dearest listeners and watchers, if you found some awesome tips based on this conversation, or if you would like to add something to this conversation, find Level Up Engineering on Twitter and make sure to give us a shout out and tell us what you have used from this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Rod. Dearest listeners and watchers, this was Rod Garcia, VP of Engineering for Platform at Slack, and we talked about creating more engaging processes for our employees. I am Carolina Toth, and I hope to see you next time.
Thanks for staying with Level Up Engineering. If you enjoyed this podcast, so will your friends. Share this episode on your favorite social networking platform. To stay up to date with our content, follow Level Up Engineering on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Google Podcast. Brought to you by Coding Sans, a software development agency building web applications with Angular and Node.js. Check them out at codingsans.com.